Good afternoon. My name is Ailsa Lamont, and I'm the Director of Pomegranate Global, and I'm also the co-founder and president of CANIE, the Climate Action Network for International Educators. That's an organisation that was launched late last year to really help the international education sector to do more, to operate more sustainably, and to raise awareness and consciousness about the need for climate action and sustainability in our sector. So I'm delighted to be here today to have the opportunity to talk to you about this whole topic. It's a very interesting and fraught topic. And of course, we've all had a lot to grapple with this year, with COVID, with all the disruptions to travel and to our personal lives, as well as to the work of our sector. So we're coming to this topic of climate change at a time of disruption, be that technological advancement, geopolitical changes, and also changes thanks to or due to the pandemic. But what that does is it offers us an opportunity to really look at what is happening within the way we work in international education and to start tying together some of the threads and perhaps combating some of the cognitive dissonance that we have had, because we have known that our sector does so much wonderful work, both for individuals and societies, by helping to create global citizens. And yet at the same time, we've become increasingly aware of the carbon footprint of the way that we do business. So what I want to do today is offer you a kind of conceptual framework to help think about how the international education sector can take action to become more environmentally sustainable, and also to drive change in a way that makes sense for our sector, both as individuals, institutions, and more globally. So what I want to do, first of all, is to illustrate some of these points by talking about CANIE, the network that I'm a co-founder of. We came together, a bunch of interested and concerned individuals from across the world and across the international education sector. We represented consultancies, providers, institutions, but what we shared was a common desire to raise our consciousness about this issue, to help people to see that there was a problem, that the way that we do business and the way we move students actually generates greenhouse gas emissions and directly contributes to the problem of climate breakdown. And we also wanted to show people that there were levers that they could pull, that we were not powerless in the face of this problem, that actually there were significant actions that we could take. So we started off by thinking about where to put our focus. And I think it's quite an illustrative example. We decided not to focus on students. And that might seem counterintuitive, because obviously all of our work is about students. We talk so much about putting students at the centre of everything we do. And yet we decided in CANIE, in the Climate Action Network for International Educators, to pull back and focus our efforts on people like you, on professionals, academics, administrators, people working within the international education business. And the reason that we did that is because we don't have time. The climate crisis is so pressing, it is so urgent, that we cannot possibly wait to focus on educating students and then waiting for them to get their hands on the levers of power. This next 5 to 10 years are really the most critical. So the action that needs to be taken by the people who have the influence now and who have their hands on the budget strings now. So that was one of the first kind of pieces of our conceptual framework about how to take action. Another was that this really is an opportunity. This shouldn't be viewed as an additional burden, a tag on top of all the other things we can do. Actually, there is a way to integrate sustainability and climate action in everything, in every aspect of internationalization, whether that's recruitment, so you can use more virtual recruitment tools to lower the amount of physical travel needed. And obviously we were thinking about that pre-COVID. COVID has added a whole other layer to that. So whether it's around the travel, or whether it's around transnational education, perhaps thinking about how you structure transnational operations to use more locally engaged staff, for example, or looking at alternatives to straight physical student mobility by looking at other types of collaborative online international learning, for example. So all of these options, of course, have been kind of accelerated, and their need has been accentuated by this global pandemic, which has stopped people from traveling. And that has been incredibly helpful in one sense, in that people have now learned that there are certain things that can be done through virtual means, through technology. All of us engaging in this online conference, for example, is something that would not have happened previously. We would all have turned up in Singapore. Most of us would have flown to do so. And to give you an example, I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. And if I had flown to Singapore, return in economy, that would have melted the equivalent of 11.5 square tons of Arctic ice. Now, I say this, I talk a lot about flying, and people might say, well, why the focus on flying? But really it's because so much of international education's impact on the climate crisis comes from flying. And there are, of course, other ways in which we generate emissions, be that through other types of road travel, both as staff and for our students. There are print and brochures, and everything that we do in life has some kind of carbon or greenhouse gas emission cost attached to it. So one of the things that we deliberately decided in CANIE quite early on was that we wanted to focus specifically on those areas that may not perhaps already be under the spotlight in universities and other institutions' sustainability plans. So, for example, most institutions are already doing incredibly important and valuable work in research, in teaching, and in working to make their campus and building infrastructure more sustainable. We chose deliberately to step away from those issues and instead to target our attention at the areas that may have fallen between the cracks. What was left when all those other areas which currently do get attention in sustainability plans, when they're left behind, it's often the staff business travel, the student travel, and also procurement options and choices by institutions, as well as looking at how you structure your business to minimize the amount of travel that is actually required. And I talk quite a lot about this, both with students and with professionals working in our industry, that we shouldn't feel ashamed of traveling. I certainly wouldn't want to deny students the opportunity to travel and study abroad. You know, we've been talking for many years in our sector where most of us, I'm sure, are absolutely convinced of the benefits of overseas study and overseas travel to help round people out, to give them those broader perspectives and help them become global citizens who really do have intercultural skills. And yet, we should be aware of the carbon cost that comes with that. So our focus is on helping people think about that, be mindful travelers, understand the carbon cost of what they do and factor it into their decisions and into their subsequent actions so that they can try to compensate or offset that in some other way throughout their lifetime. So first of all, we have a kind of hierarchy of action. The first one being to eliminate or remove the need for travel unless it's absolutely necessary. And I suppose what that does is it sharpens our understanding of what the real benefits of interaction in a foreign country actually are, of that immersion in a foreign country. And I think we all know that they do exist. We know they are important, but this is driving us to perhaps sharpen and hone our articulation of that value. And so what we want to do is make sure that that can continue, but that we cut out the rest. And that might mean, for example, even when COVID vaccines or other changes mean that we can go back to traveling, that we do so perhaps in a different way, and that we restructure the way that we all interact and do business to at least cut some of the face-to-face contact that we have. And of course, there are co-benefits of doing that. I'm sure there are some people in the audience today who may not have had the opportunity to attend the conference live in Singapore, but who are able to do so now because we have shifted to this online platform. And don't get me wrong, I can't wait to see people in person again too. But what I think we probably will move to in so many aspects of our work and in our lives will be a more hybrid model where we can actually still get the benefits of that intercultural and global connectedness whilst maintaining a much lower carbon footprint for the sector. So that's first of it, to think about where we can cut out any travel. Then when we do travel, to think about and introduce in our operations ways to make that travel more less carbon intensive. And there are actually relatively simple ways of doing that now. There are carbon trackers being built into many travel management systems. There are also free ones online that you can download if that system isn't yet an option where you work. You can start choosing different lower cost, lower carbon routes to travel. And that just comes as part of a conscious decision to factor the emissions associated with any activity into your decision making in the same way that at present you might factor in cost, return on investment, staff availability. There should simply be an extra factor there, which is around the carbon cost of what you do. So that's the next step, is then reducing the emissions that you actually generate by looking for lower cost ways, lower carbon ways to travel. The next one is offsetting or insetting. And I know this is a very contentious area. Many people feel it's almost like the old medieval system of paying atonement. You simply give some money to somebody and they plant some trees or fix a waterway for you, and you've absolved yourself of any blame or guilt. And I don't think we should feel guilt, but at the same time, there is something to be said for that kind of approach. But the way I would put it, it's a bit like with COVID. Washing your hands or wearing a mask on its own is not enough. But if you do it as part of a broader range of tools in your toolkit, then it can still be valuable. If you do plan to offset, then certainly I would recommend going for the gold standard as an official type of offset, which is one of the more reputable ones. But another option is insetting, which is where institutions or organizations deliberately choose to perhaps restore a wilderness area or to plant trees somewhere within their direct area of control, such as on their campus, so they can actually see the benefits of the work that they do. So eliminate, reduce, offset. That's on the kind of sustainable travel side. One of the next key areas or ways in which institutions or providers or agents can take action is, of course, around education. We are, after all, in the business of education. And certainly it strikes me that eco-literacy or climate action literacy, or however you want to define it, should be an absolute basic for all globally mobile students, at least, if not a basic graduation requirement for everybody going through higher education these days. We talk about producing global citizens. That is really what international education has been about for so long. It's not just the qualification that you gain, it's everything else that comes with it. And I don't believe that you can be a global citizen in this day and age if you're not eco-literate. It really should come as part of the territory. And there are many ways which institutions and providers around the world are seeking to embed those skills and that knowledge within the curriculum or in short-term programs for either international students or globally mobile students heading overseas on shorter programs. And it's such an opportunity to actually give students a way of understanding more about the culture of where they're going to study. If they can actually start looking at, for example, whether a particular destination has to think about climate mitigation or climate adaptation, issues around climate justice, which are of course related to racial justice. All of these issues are so important, and I think that climate action as a platform to help students understand some of those issues, and perhaps even as a conversation starter once they get to their destination country, can be incredibly valuable and can also help develop those skills which students actually want to bolster so that they can be more employable graduates after their studies in any case. So there's definitely a place for climate action and climate literacy within experiential learning, within the curriculum. And international students generally, young people generally, are increasingly concerned about the climate. I think the whole world is increasingly concerned, but it's obviously been driven so much of late, this growing awareness which has become so very, very evident around the world, driven by the wonderful school strikes movement started by Greta Thunberg in Sweden and picked up by young people around the world. Now, that hasn't yet fully translated into a demand by prospective students for their institutions to take action, but I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that demand has come and institutions are only now kind of working out how best to respond to that. And another is that there have been a few pieces of the kind of core infrastructure, decision-making infrastructure that have been missing, such as an easy way of ranking universities and other providers based on how committed to climate action they actually are. But I think that is growing, and I think it will continue to grow. And I think it's something that university leadership and university finance officers should really be very concerned with, because as soon as there is a comprehensive way of ranking that, there are certainly students in a number of countries who will be trying to factor that into their decisions. So I've talked about some of the different ways that institutions can take action. What I want to talk about now is the way that we as individuals can also take, we have more power than I think we sometimes realize. And a lot of the discussion around climate action focuses on either individual changes, behavioural changes, or the high-level policy and legislative changes. We know that, for example, 100 companies generate 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So, of course, all of us choosing to take one less flight a year or to halve our flights by 50% each year is not going to solve the problem of global heating. Yet, this is not just a top-down and a bottom-up problem. It actually is such a huge problem that it needs to be tackled from top-down, bottom-up, and side-on. And I think within each of our workplaces, wherever they may be, whatever type they may be, we have a great deal of collective power, collective purchasing power, which can really shape and influence provision of services. So, for example, we can mandate in contracts, we have the right to mandate often in contracts that we would like catering to include a higher proportion of plant-based food. We can ask our travel management companies to give us those emissions calculators and dashboards so that we can make informed decisions. We can talk to airlines and ask them for coalitions and partnerships to look at perhaps offsetting. There are so many areas where the institution actually can really drive change both within the communities and at a larger scale. And of course, potentially at a government policy level through advocacy. So what I would like to say is the example of what we have found with the CANIE network, which has started off as really a very grassroots network, and we've recently incorporated and become an official not-for-profit and are looking to really grow. And we've gone from, a handful of supporters in just over a year to over 2,000, and the number is growing rapidly. And I think that speaks to the fact that this is an incredibly important field, and people are already taking so much action, whether it's embedding curriculum in the SDGs, whether it's thinking about how they can switch students from plane travel to train travel. Some institutions are even putting in place carbon taxes within their own universities. And one has a carbon trading scheme that I've come across. But there are also incentives for students to come up with sustainability initiatives. And it's such an opportunity now with COVID, especially with all of us having had this opportunity to really switch to more of a virtual life, to think about what that more sustainable hybrid approach to our work might be when we come out the other side of this, as I obviously hope we do. And one of the other things that I'd just like to point out is that